Today I'm fielding a question from a client at my grooming shop who has a young dog. He's about 9 months old, and he had his first experience, well, I should say she had her first experience of going into the kitchen and finding something marked, peed on in the kitchen. It's a chair leg or table leg or a cabinet that's stuck out into the room, something like that. Those are the typical things that a dog will go for to mark. Partly because things that stick out and protrude are where they instinctively mark. It's a little bit like, oh, here, let me spray paint this. But they're spray painting it with smell, not with color. So where they have super strong sense of smell, where we have excellent vision. So when we mark things to share information, we do it visually. And when dogs mark things to share information, they do it with the scent of their urine. Anyway, so it's a concern because, this happened. What's that mean? How do I keep it from happening again? How do I keep it from escalating into a really big problem that makes me really have difficulty with this dog? Because there's not too many things that will escalate difficulty living with a dog than a dog that eliminates in the house in one way or another. And so this was a legitimate concern. At 9 months, depending on the size of your dog, the breed of your dog, 9 months is a pretty typical age for the testosterone to flip the switch in a male dog's brain that makes them start lifting their leg. When you see a dog lifting his leg for the first time or two ever, they have this look on their face like, why am I doing this? What's happening? Why am I lifting my leg up to pee? Anyway, they're not doing it to be bad. They're doing it because a switch has been flipped in their brain, like I said. And they're learning a new behavior. So the first thing I told her is she needs to go back to the very earliest housebreaking rules to make sure this instinctive switch being flipped doesn't cause him to experiment with behaviors in such a way that he learns that peeing in the house is something that can happen. Because once a dog learns something can happen, it becomes an option. And we don't want that in this case. So, back to not letting the dog out of her sight. You can close doors so the dog has to be in the room with you. You can put them on a leash and anchor them to a piece of furniture so they can't leave. If they jump over baby gates, which is what was the case for her, that's what she tried, and immediately he just jumped over the baby gate. The first thing that dogs learn about housebreaking isn't don't pee in the house. It's don't pee in front of the person. Don't pee in front of the humans. Nothing happens to them negative when they just pee in the house. The only negatives about it are when people are there. So at first, to build the habit, you have to be there. And that motivates them to hold it. Like when you are driving down the road and there's a cop in your rearview mirror. Are you speeding? I don't think so. Not once you see it's there. So that builds the habit of holding it. And then that carries over into the future when you're not there. So that was the first thing. back to the basics of house training so that new habits could be reestablished with this new thing that's going on in the dog's brain. The other thing I had her do is she goes on daily walks as opposed to just turning the dog loose in the yard. And there's a couple of places where he likes to pee, likes to mark. With young dogs, there can be a difference between just peeing and marking. They'll often still squat to just pee. And they're like, oh my gosh, I gotta get rid of this. But when they're marking, they lift their leg and they squirt a bit at a time. So she will go to the places that he's used to peeing and praise him profusely for peeing in the right place. Now, she has already picked out a few main places for him to pee based on an earlier difficulty, which was he wanted to pee everywhere. He just was like, oh, I'll pee on this, I'll pee on this, I'll pee here, I'll pee here, I'll pee here. It was everything from a mailbox to a rock to a light pole to a car tire to trash cans to everything. So I told her to give him some specific places that he could pee, he could mark, he could spend as much time as he wanted there and mark up a storm in 2 or 3 places along their normal walk so that he would get out of the habit that he could just stop and pee anywhere. And that has worked really well. So that's going to serve her well now, because when she goes to those places, she can reinforce that marking those things is really good. And that will reestablish that there are places that it's okay to mark and places that it's not okay to mark. And that is going to carry over when she comes back in the house. And he is in the house and making decisions. He won't necessarily just impulsively go, oh, I had an urge to lift my leg. Let me pee on this first thing I see. Instead, he'll have some mindfulness built in about, oh, but I usually don't pee here. I usually pee elsewhere. And that, coupled with her supervision and his inability to leave the room she's in, over the next 2 or 3 weeks is probably long enough to make sure, since this isn't an established habit that we're trying to undo, we're just trying to make sure the right habit gets locked in. Then after about that long, can start to experiment again with leaving the room for longer and longer periods of time. And if there's any backsliding, you just go back to square one. Sometimes we have to go back to square one 2 or 3 or 4 times. And that's annoying, no doubt. And it's disappointing sometimes because we think they should be doing different than they are. But each dog is who he is. And some of them have stronger impulses than others. Some of them are more habitual than others. Some of them try to game the system more than others. They're all different. And they're all going to get to the place that you want them in a different amount of time. And it's not a reflection on you that it takes longer or you have to go back to square one multiple times. In fact, going back to square one multiple times reflects very well on you as an owner and a trainer, because it means that you respect the individuality of the dog And you're not just putting judgments of should based on what other people say or what society and culture have sort of taught us is right. And I say that in air quotes. So, take your time. Use your brain. Think outside of their box and control their environment, control their opportunities to create the habits that you want. That's how you create habits that stick.